Long before the Bible, before Egypt, before Greece, the Sumerians etched a story into clay, a story of beings who descended from the sky, powerful, radiant, and nothing like men. They called them the Anunnaki. Were they gods or something else entirely? According to the tablets, these beings came with purpose, to mine, to rule, and to engineer. And in their experiments, humanity was born, not as a random spark of evolution, but as a crafted species designed to serve. Yet within the design, something slipped through, a spark they could not contain. Consciousness, the divine seed, the one force that could not be coded. Across the world, echoes of the same story appear: the serpent in Eden, the giants of Genesis, the watchers who fell from the heavens. Different names, same pattern, a hidden origin. This is the rabbit hole most fear to enter, because once you step into it, history, as you were taught, begins to unravel. Were we shaped by gods, or manipulated by beings who were never gods at all? Welcome to the Anunnaki rabbit hole. The forbidden truth about our origins begins here. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where rivers carved fertile valleys from desert, the first civilization rose. The Sumerians called their cities Uruk, Eridu, Nippur. From the dust, they built temples, irrigation canals, and laws. But more than any invention, they left behind something that still haunts us today. Thousands of clay tablets etched in cuneiform, the world's oldest written language. And in those lines of wedges and strokes, they recorded a story unlike any other. They wrote that their kingship did not emerge from men, but descended from heaven. They described beings called the Anunnaki, those who from the heavens to earth came. These were not metaphors. The tablets list their names, their ranks, their purposes. Enlil, the stern commander. Enki, the wise and rebellious god of the deep. Ninhursag, the mother goddess of birth. They were said to have walked among humans, ruled cities, and shaped destinies. To the Sumerians, they were not abstractions of nature. They were rulers, flesh and spirit entwined, dwelling in ziggurats that touched the sky. Archaeologists marvel that such a sophisticated mythology appeared fully formed as early as 3000 BCE. But the Sumerians themselves insisted it was no invention. They claimed their knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, mathematics was given to them. They tracked the stars with precision, knew of planets invisible to the naked eye, and built myths so detailed that many modern researchers, like Zecharia Sitchin, argue they read more like history than allegory. Even the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic derived from Sumerian sources, speaks of cosmic battles, planets colliding, and gods reshaping the earth. And within these stories lies something even more radical. The tablets describe the creation of humanity not as an act of divine love, but as a project. According to the Atrahasis epic, humans were fashioned from clay mixed with the blood of a god, molded to bear the labor the Anunnaki no longer wished to perform. The language is strikingly direct. Mankind was engineered to serve. Yet in this act of manipulation, something unexpected was born. The consciousness that could one day see beyond its programming. These records also describe disasters, floods unleashed to reset creation, cities rising and falling under divine command. The Sumerian king list even places reigns of thousands of years before the deluge, suggesting a time when lifespans were vastly different, or time itself moved under another order. To the modern eye, these are myths, but to the Sumerians, they were memory. A memory carved into stone to ensure it was never lost. the question is unavoidable. How could the first civilization, emerging seemingly out of nowhere, carry such detailed stories of beings from the heavens, advanced knowledge of the stars, and a creation myth that echoes genetic engineering? Were these tales only symbolic, or are they fragments of an older truth? The clay tablets remain silent, yet their silence speaks loudly. The oldest records of humanity's origin tell us we were not alone at the beginning. Something walked beside us, shaped us, and perhaps still watches from beyond. Among the names etched into the Sumerian tablets, two figures rise above the rest, not only as leaders of the Anunnaki, but as brothers locked in an eternal struggle. Enki and Enlil. Their rivalry shaped the destiny of humanity, their conflict echoing through myth, religion, and even the moral struggles we still face today. To understand the story of the Anunnaki, one must first understand the war between these two powers. Enki, often called Ea in later Akkadian myths, was the god of water, wisdom, and creation. He was the geneticist, the engineer, the one who understood the secrets of life. It was Enki, according to the Atrahasis epic, who conceived the idea of mixing divine blood with clay to fashion humanity as workers for the Anunnaki. But Enki's role was not simply that of a manipulator. The texts reveal him as a benefactor, a trickster god who often defied orders to protect the humans he helped create. He taught them skills, whispered forbidden knowledge, and sought to elevate them beyond servitude. In some versions, he is even the Serpent of Eden, offering wisdom to humanity despite the wrath of his superiors. Enlil, by contrast, was the commander, lord of the wind, the storm, and authority itself. If Enki represented compassion and cunning, Enlil embodied law and order, hierarchy and control. The Sumerian king list and countless hymns present him as the one who decrees fates, who demands obedience from both gods and men. He was not cruel without reason, but his vision was rigid. Humanity, to Enlil, was a tool, created for labor, bound to serve, expendable if unruly. The tablets describe his disdain for humans, their noise, their rebellion, their tendency to grow beyond the roles they were given. The tension between these two worldviews erupted in myths of punishment and salvation. When humanity grew too numerous, the Atrahasis epic tells us, Enlil sent plagues and famine to thin their numbers. When that failed, he conspired to unleash a great flood, a deluge meant to erase mankind entirely. But Enki intervened. He whispered warnings to Atrahasis, instructing him to build a vessel and preserve life. This story would echo across cultures: the biblical Noah, the Babylonian Utnapishtim. All carry the same shadow, the war of the brothers written into human survival. Even their symbols reveal their opposition. Enki is often associated with serpents, flowing waters, and the mysteries of the deep. Enlil is tied to mountains, storms, and the dry winds of command. One bends, adapts, and teaches. The other imposes, enforces, and rules. Humanity has long stood in the middle, pulled between the liberating trickster who gives knowledge and the stern father who demands obedience. Some scholars, such as Zecharia Sitchin, have argued that this rivalry is not just mythic but historical, an echo of real divisions among advanced beings whose presence shaped our early development. The echoes of this brotherly war are everywhere. In religion, it becomes the conflict between a wrathful deity and a hidden savior. In culture, it becomes the struggle between law and compassion, obedience and freedom. And in the human heart, it becomes the inner tension between fear of authority and longing for wisdom. The Sumerians did not just record the deeds of gods, they preserved the blueprint of our collective struggle. The war of the brothers was never only theirs. It became ours, replayed across centuries, encoded in the very myths that still guide our world. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, archaeologists unearthed thousands of clay tablets, tiny bricks of history pressed with the marks of cuneiform. They were receipts, contracts, hymns, maps. But among them were stranger texts, epics of creation, lists of kings stretching back before the flood, and instructions whispered from gods to men. These were the tablets of creation, documents that tell a story far older than Genesis and far stranger than the myths we inherited. The Sumerians believed their knowledge came from beings they called the Anunnaki. These tablets describe the descent of rulers from the heavens, bearing the blueprint of civilization. They gave humanity writing, numbers, astronomy, and law. The very act of recording with stylus and clay was said to be a gift from them, a way to preserve memory against the erosion of time. The detail is staggering. Constellations mapped, planetary orbits described, measurements of the earth and sky. Scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the foremost experts in Sumerian literature, marveled at their sophistication. Some knowledge, he noted, seemed out of place for a people only just emerging from the Stone Age. One of the most striking records is the Enuma Elish, later adopted by Babylonian culture, but rooted in Sumerian cosmology. It tells of Tiamat, the primordial sea, slain by Marduk, who then shapes the heavens and earth from her divided body. Within this cosmic battle lies encoded knowledge, references to planetary collisions, to the ordering of a chaotic system. To the modern eye, it reads like myth, yet to those who carved it, it was memory. The story of how the cosmos was shaped and how their god secured dominion over it. The Atrahasis epic adds another layer. Here the gods labor, tire of their toil, and decide to fashion a new being to bear the burden. With clay mixed with divine essence, humankind is made. The language is clear. This was not spontaneous life, but engineered life, a deliberate act. And the one who orchestrated it was Enki, the cunning god of wisdom. But the texts also reveal Enlil's disdain for this creation, his attempts to limit and control it. Thus, in the tablets themselves, the seeds of divine rivalry are planted, themes that ripple through later mythologies of serpents, floods, and forbidden knowledge. What makes these tablets so unsettling is not only their content, but their consistency. Independent fragments, found in separate cities, repeat the same names, the same stories, the same chronology of gods shaping men. It is as though an entire civilization agreed to record not metaphor, but history. Even the Sumerian king list, which tracks rulers for tens of thousands of years before the flood, insists that kingship descended from heaven. These were not metaphors for them. They were declarations. When we read these tablets today with our scientific eyes, we see something extraordinary. Stories of genetic engineering hidden in metaphors of clay and blood. Accounts of cataclysms that align with geological evidence of floods. Maps of the heavens that match modern astronomy. Knowledge carved in clay that survived millennia, whispering to us still. Humanity's beginnings may not have been an accident, but an intervention. And those who carved it wanted us to remember. The Sumerian tablets describe a problem that plagued the Anunnaki. They had come to Earth seeking something vital, gold, not merely for wealth, but for survival. According to Zecharia Sitchin's interpretations of the Enuma Elish and other Mesopotamian texts, the Anunnaki's homeworld required gold to repair its atmosphere. This detail, strange as it seems, resonates with modern science. for gold's reflective and conductive properties could, in theory, stabilize an environment. To the ancients, this was not abstract. They wrote that their gods dug deep into the earth, laboring in mines to extract what they needed. But soon the toil became too great, and rebellion broke out among the lesser Anunnaki workers. It was here that a radical decision was made. If labor was too heavy for the divine, then another being would be made to carry it. The Atrahasis epic tells us that Enki, the god of wisdom, proposed a solution. He would fashion a new creature by mixing clay, the substance of earth, with the blood or essence of a god. The tablets describe the process in language that, to modern ears, sounds eerily like genetic engineering. A god is sacrificed, his blood used as the divine ingredient. That blood, mixed with earthly matter, gives rise to the first human, not born of chance, but manufactured for function. The language is startling. The Sumerians did not describe humanity as a gift of love or as a spontaneous creation. They described us as workers, formed to relieve the gods of their burden. In these accounts, the first humans were not kings or priests, but laborers in mines and fields, designed to obey. The texts even record the initial failures, beings that could not reproduce, bodies that were weak or malformed. Adjustments were made until finally, the experiment produced a viable species capable of survival and propagation. This was the beginning of Homo sapiens as we know it, according to this forbidden history. Yet within this act of manipulation, something else emerged. Enki, sympathetic to his creation, is said to have given humanity more than what was intended: knowledge, skills, the capacity to dream and to question. To Enlil, this was a rebellion. To Enki, it was balance. Thus the war of the brothers deepened, with humans caught between them. One god seeing them as tools, the other seeing them as potential. Modern science lends curious echoes. Geneticists have long puzzled over the sudden leap that separated humans from earlier hominids. Around 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared with larger brains, complex language, and symbolic thought. Some researchers point to chromosome 2, which appears to be the result of a fusion event unlike what is found in other primates. Mainstream science explains this as natural mutation, but to those who read the tablets, it looks like evidence of intervention. The leap was too sudden, too drastic, as though something was inserted into the code. The Sumerian stories go further. They describe humanity as carrying within its bloodline the essence of the gods. Not fully divine, not fully animal, but a hybrid. This duality explains our contradictions, our capacity for compassion and cruelty, brilliance and destruction, transcendence and servitude. We were engineered to labor, yet within us burns a spark that longs for freedom, a spark that may not have been part of the plan. In the mythic memory of Sumer, the birth of humanity was not the dawn of innocence, but the beginning of an experiment. Gold, blood, and DNA intertwined to create a being that could serve, but also one that could awaken. And it is this paradox, that we were shaped to be slaves, yet destined to be more, that still defines the human story. In the biblical tradition, the story of Eden describes a garden, a tree, and a serpent. Humanity, innocent and obedient, is told to remain ignorant of good and evil. But the serpent intervenes, offering knowledge, and for this act both man and woman are punished. At its core, this myth casts the serpent as deceiver and God as protector. Yet when viewed through the Sumerian lens, the story shifts dramatically. The serpent may not have been a tempter at all, but a liberator. And behind the serpent's mask stands Enki, the rebel god who defied authority to to give humanity the very spark that made us more than slaves. The Sumerian texts speak of Enki as the god of wisdom and the one most sympathetic to mankind. While Enlil sought control and obedience, Enki granted skills, knowledge of irrigation, writing, mathematics, and even the arts of healing. He was the one who secretly warned Atrahasis of the coming flood, ensuring the survival of humanity when Enlil sought to erase them. Within this framework, the Eden story takes on a new meaning. The forbidden fruit is not simply temptation, it is the gift of awareness, the capacity to discern, to question, to choose. What the biblical text portrays as disobedience, the Sumerian memory portrays as liberation. Even the serpent symbolism reinforces this connection. Enki's emblem was often intertwined serpents, an image that later became the caduceus, still used as a symbol of healing and knowledge today. In Mesopotamian art, serpents were associated with fertility, wisdom, and transformation, the very qualities the Eden serpent represents. To demonize the serpent was to obscure the figure of Enki, replacing a benefactor with an enemy, and transforming an act of awakening into an act of sin. Scholars such as Zecharia Sitchin have argued that this reinterpretation was deliberate, a rewriting of history to vilify the God who gave humanity independence and exalt the authority that sought to suppress it. The parallels are striking. In Genesis, the Lord warns that eating from the tree will lead to death, but the serpent promises it will open the eyes. When Adam and Eve eat, they do not die instantly. Instead, they awaken. They become aware of themselves, their bodies, their choices. The punishment that follows is expulsion and toil, but the act itself grants knowledge. This is precisely the dynamic recorded in the Sumerian tablets. Enlil imposing limits, Enki granting freedom, humanity caught in the tension between obedience and awareness. This rewriting has consequences. By portraying knowledge as sin, later traditions placed humanity in a state of perpetual guilt, dependent on intermediaries for redemption. But the older story suggests the opposite, that the act of awakening was humanity's first step toward sovereignty. The serpent was not an enemy, but an ally. The garden was not paradise lost, but a prison escaped. The story of Enki as serpent reshapes how we see ourselves. It suggests that within the human design lies a seed planted not for servitude, but for liberation. That the true danger was never knowledge, but the rulers who feared what an awakened humanity might become. And perhaps that is why this version of the story was buried, recast and demonized. Because if we remembered that the serpent was the friend of mankind, we might begin to question every authority that tells us ignorance is safety and obedience is virtue. The garden was not our fall, it was the beginning of our rise. The story of a great flood is one of the most universal myths on earth. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Hebrew Bible, from Greek legends of Deucalion to Hindu accounts of Manu, cultures separated by oceans all describe a time when waters rose and nearly erased humanity. Scholars such as Samuel Noah Kramer noted long ago that the earliest recorded flood story comes from Mesopotamia, preserved in the Sumerian Atrahasis epic. But when these texts are read in detail, the flood is not simply a natural disaster. It appears as a deliberate act, a reset designed to wipe away a creation that had grown too noisy, too independent, too alive for the comfort of its makers. The Atrahasis tablets tell of a world where humans, created to labor for the gods, multiplied. They became restless. Their voices grew loud. Enlil, the stern commander, complained of their clamor and sought a solution. First came plague, then famine. But when humans persisted, he resolved to unleash the ultimate punishment, a flood so vast it would cleanse the earth of mankind. To the Sumerians, this was not a metaphor. It was divine judgment, etched into the clay as memory of an event that nearly ended the human experiment. Yet the story holds another figure, Enki, the trickster and benefactor of man. Bound by oath not to defy the assembly of gods, he found a way to bend the rules. He whispered through reeds, speaking to Atrahasis, instructing him to build a great vessel. Into this ark he brought his family, animals, and seeds of life. When the waters came, as the text described with haunting detail, the flood raged for 7 days and 7 nights. Cities were drowned, temples were toppled, but Atrahasis endured, and with him humanity survived. This narrative, later retold in the Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh, echoes unmistakably in the story of Noah. The parallels are too precise to dismiss. The warning, the ark, the chosen survivor, the preservation of species. The biblical account is not an isolated revelation. It is an inheritance from Sumer. Modern archaeology adds another layer. Evidence of catastrophic flooding exists in the ancient Mesopotamian plain. Excavations at Shuruppak, a city linked to Atrahasis, reveal thick deposits of river silt dating back to around 2900 BCE. Scholars like Leonard Woolley, who uncovered flood layers at concluded that some memory of a devastating deluge was preserved in these myths. Whether global or regional, the event left scars deep enough to become legend, passed down and reshaped by every culture that touched its echo. But the flood story is more than geology. It is a parable of power. Enlil sought to erase what he saw as failed creation. Enki sought to preserve it, to give humanity another chance. These two impulses, control and compassion, reappear across human history. Leaders who erase, prophets who preserve, rulers who silence, sages who save. In the clash of the flood, we see again the war of the brothers, played out on a cosmic stage with humanity caught in the tide. The flood did not only cleanse the earth, it also cleansed memory. Entire cities vanished beneath mud and water. Records were lost. Survivors emerged into a world broken, forced to rebuild, their knowledge fragmented. In this sense, the flood was not only punishment but reset, a chance for the system to start anew, with history buried and origins obscured. And perhaps that was the true intention, to erase the first civilization, to scatter the clues, to make the story of humanity start again in ignorance. Yet the tablets remained. Fragments of cuneiform survived long enough to whisper their truth into the present. They tell us the flood was real, it was vast, and it was deliberate. And they leave us with the question, how many times has humanity been reset? How many floods, how many erasures, before we remember what we were always meant to be? Among the most controversial and fascinating claims to emerge from Sumerian mythology is the tale of Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. The term appears in Babylonian astronomical texts, often describing a celestial body that crosses paths with others. Scholars like Zecharia Sitchin, in his Earth Chronicles series, argued that Nibiru was not just a poetic symbol, but an actual planet, one with an elongated orbit that takes thousands of years to complete. According to this interpretation, it was from Nibiru that the Anunnaki descended, bringing their technology, their ambitions, and their conflicts into the cradle of human civilization. The Sumerians were extraordinary skywatchers. They tracked the movements of the stars with a precision that still amazes archaeologists. On their clay tablets, they listed constellations, eclipses, and planetary alignments. They depicted the solar system with a central sun, surrounding planets, and even included what some scholars interpret as an additional world beyond the known ones. Mainstream Assyriologists often argue that Nibiru was simply a name for Jupiter or another wandering star. But within the context of the Anunnaki story, Nibiru takes on a much more dramatic role, a rogue planet whose inhabitants intervened in the affairs of Earth. According to the narrative Sitchin reconstructs from the Enuma Elish, Nibiru was a massive world pulled into our solar system in ancient times. Its passage caused cataclysmic collisions, including the shattering of a primordial planet between Mars and Jupiter, giving rise to the asteroid belt. Over time, its orbit stabilized into a vast ellipse, returning near Earth every 3,600 years. For the Anunnaki, this orbit dictated cycles of presence and absence. When Nibiru drew close, their influence on Earth intensified. When it receded, they vanished from human affairs, leaving only myths and temples as reminders. If Nibiru was real, the implications are staggering. It would explain why the Sumerians insisted their gods were from heaven, yet not distant and immaterial. It would explain the sudden leaps in human knowledge, aligned with periods when these beings were said to walk among us. Even in modern times, whispers of a hidden planet beyond Pluto, sometimes called Planet X, continue to surface in astronomy. While mainstream science has not confirmed Nibiru, the idea of a massive undiscovered world tugging at the edges of our solar system remains under discussion. But beyond astronomy, Nibiru is also a symbol. Its crossing represents intrusion, disruption, a breaking of the ordinary order. For the Sumerians, it was the planet that brought gods to Earth, for better and worse. It was the place of origin for the beings who mined gold, altered DNA, and set humanity on a path we are still walking. The very word crossing suggests a boundary between worlds, a gate between dimensions. In this sense, Nibiru becomes not only a planet but a threshold, the place where heaven and earth intersect, where mortal and divine collide. Skeptics dismiss Nibiru as misinterpretation, but the myth will not die. It surfaces again and again in conspiracy theories about doomsday arrivals, in mystical teachings about hidden worlds, and in modern astronomy's search for lost planets. Perhaps the power of Nibiru lies not only in whether it exists, but in what it represents, the memory of a cosmic connection humanity has forgotten. The Sumerians carved it into clay so it would not be erased, a reminder that our origins may not be confined to Earth alone, but tied to a crossing planet, a wandering home of gods who became our makers. The Sumerian king list is one of the most enigmatic documents ever discovered. Carved into clay more than 4,000 years ago, it does not simply record rulers in sequence. It begins with a declaration that kingship itself descended from heaven. Before the flood, it says, kings reigned for tens of thousands of years, lifespans so vast they stretch beyond imagination. After the flood, reigns grew shorter, but the principle remained. Authority was not born from human consent, but delivered from the gods. This claim was not poetry to the Sumerians. It was history. They believed their rulers were chosen, or even descended, from the Anunnaki themselves. Archaeologists such as Thorkild Jacobsen, who studied the king list in depth, acknowledged the strangeness of these long reigns. Mainstream scholars interpret them as myth, symbolic exaggerations to glorify ancient rulers. But to those who take the text at face value, they suggest something else. Beings who are not entirely human, possessing lifespans far beyond ours, establishing dynasties that stretched across ages. These were not kings in the ordinary sense. They were hybrids of divine and human blood, vessels through which the Anunnaki maintained their grip on civilization. The Sumerian tablets and later Akkadian myths describe the gods living among men, taking human wives and fathering children. These offspring, part divine and part mortal, became the bridge between worlds. The Bible echoes this in the book of Genesis, where the sons of God took daughters of men, producing the nephilim, giants, and men of renown. In both traditions, the idea is the same. Humanity was ruled not by mortals alone, but by bloodlines infused with something otherworldly. Kingship was quite literally from heaven. This concept shaped the political order of Mesopotamia. Ziggurats were not just temples, but thrones where divine and human authority met. Rituals of coronation emphasized the ruler's connection to the gods, legitimizing power as a continuation of heavenly will. To challenge the king was to challenge the cosmic order itself. Yet within this framework lies the question: were these kings serving their people, or were they serving the designs of their Anunnaki ancestors? Echoes of these bloodlines extend beyond Sumer. Egyptian pharaohs claimed descent from the gods, often depicted as sons of Ra or Horus. In Mesoamerica, Mayan and Aztec rulers traced their authority to sky beings who descended in radiant forms. Even in medieval Europe, the doctrine of the divine right of kings echoed the same principle, that rulers were chosen by forces beyond Earth. These parallels suggest a memory that transcends culture, pointing back to a shared origin where power was seeded from above. Modern researchers speculate that fragments of these bloodlines continue even today. Royal families, priestly classes, and secret societies often claim ancient ancestry, some whispering of descent from gods or stars. Whether literal or symbolic, the theme persists: authority linked to something beyond the ordinary human story. In esoteric traditions, these lineages are sometimes portrayed as custodians of forbidden knowledge, guarding secrets passed down from the age when the Anunnaki walked among men. The king list closes its earlier entries with the flood, as though that cataclysm severed a direct connection. Afterward, reigns shorten. Kings become more recognizably human, but the idea remains. Kingship still descends from heaven, just in subtler forms. The narrative implies that humanity has long been ruled through these divine bloodlines, whether through actual lineage or the myth that sustains them. When we look at these records today, we face a haunting possibility. The structures of power that govern our world may not be accidents of history, but legacies of something much older, planted at the dawn of civilization. The bloodlines of kings may carry more than prestige. They may carry the remnants of a pact between gods and men, a pact that ensured heaven's rule over earth long after the sky gods themselves departed. In nearly every corner of the ancient world, we find stories of giants, towering figures who walked among men, who built great monuments, who ruled with strength and sometimes terror. In the Hebrew Bible, they are called the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. In the book of Enoch, they are portrayed as beings of immense size and appetite, consuming the earth's resources until chaos forced divine intervention. But the Sumerian tablets, which predate these accounts, also whisper of hybrid beings born from the unions of the Anunnaki and humanity. To the Sumerians, they were the offspring of heaven and earth, giants who proved both a blessing and a curse. Genesis 6:4 records, almost casually, that there were giants in the earth in those days. Later translations softened the word. but the original Hebrew nephilim means fallen ones, beings cast down, half-bloods born of a forbidden union. The parallel to the Mesopotamian myths is unmistakable. The Anunnaki, descending from the heavens, intermingled with human women, producing children who were neither fully divine nor fully human. These hybrids, with extraordinary lifespans and strength, became the rulers of the early world. The Sumerian king list, with its impossibly long reigns before the flood, may be reflecting precisely this age, when the Nephilim walked the earth as kings. Archaeological whispers lend strange weight to these legends. Around the world, reports of oversized skeletons have surfaced, often dismissed as hoaxes, yet persistent enough to fuel speculation. Megalithic structures, such as Baalbek in Lebanon or the massive stones at Pumapunku in Bolivia, raise questions of scale. The precision of their construction seems beyond the capacity of early human technology, leading some to wonder if larger beings, giants, were involved in their creation. Mainstream archaeology resists this interpretation, but the stories refuse to die. In Mesopotamian art, gods and kings are often depicted towering over mortals, not always metaphorically, but proportionally. Reliefs show beings of great stature standing beside human attendants, their size emphasized again and again. Could these be symbolic exaggerations, or are they reflections of a reality now obscured by time? The Book of Enoch offers further detail, describing Nephilim as being so massive that when they could not sustain themselves, they turned to consuming humanity. Their corruption of the earth became so great that the flood was unleashed to erase them. Here again, the echo with Sumerian accounts of divine wrath and cleansing waters is undeniable. The presence of giants in mythology is not limited to the Near East. In Norse lore, the Jotnar were primeval giants at odds with the gods. In Greek myth, the Gigantes waged war against Olympus. In Native American traditions, tales of red-haired giants populate the deserts and mountains. The universality of this theme suggests a shared memory, scattered across cultures but pointing back to a time when beings larger than life shaped the human world. If the Nephilim were real, they represent the inevitable consequence of hybridization. When the Anunnaki mingled with humanity, they did not only create workers, they created offspring whose power destabilized the order. Too strong, too unruly, too dangerous to control, these giants became both rulers and threats. Their existence demanded a reckoning. The flood, then, was not just about silencing noisy humans. It was about erasing a hybrid race that had grown beyond its creator's design. The legacy of the Nephilim lingers. In folklore, in architecture, in genetic memory, they remain as shadows of an age when gods and men shared bloodlines, whether as literal beings or symbols of corrupted power. The giants remind us that humanity's origins may not be as simple as dust and breath. We may carry within us traces of a story too vast, too dangerous to be left intact. The Sumerian tablets leave us with an unsettling paradox. Humanity, according to their records, was not born free but engineered. Created from clay and divine blood, we were designed to serve, to labor in fields and mines, to bear the burden that the Anunnaki no longer wished to endure. In this sense, our origins paint us as a slave race, molded for utility rather than destiny. Yet woven into these same texts is another truth, one that complicates the picture. For within this act of hybridization, something emerged that could not be contained. Consciousness, imagination, the spark of the divine. The Atrahasis epic speaks of the sacrifice of a god, whose blood was mixed into clay to fashion the first humans. To the Anunnaki, this was the solution to a problem of labor. But to Enki, who oversaw the creation, it was an opportunity to embed something more. He gave humanity not only the ability to function, but the capacity to learn, to dream, to question. Later myths portray this as dangerous rebellion. To Enlil, humanity was noisy, unruly, forever pushing against its bounds. To Enki, this was the very proof that the experiment had succeeded in ways no one expected. The hybrid was more than a worker. It was a being with potential. Science offers curious echoes of this story. Paleoanthropology records a sudden leap around 200,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens emerged with larger brains, symbolic thought, and advanced tools. Our genetic record reveals anomalies, like the fusion that produced human chromosome 2, suggesting radical changes that separate us from other primates. Mainstream biology attributes this to natural mutation and selection, but to those reading the Sumerian texts, it looks like fingerprints on the code, signs of intervention that accelerated evolution beyond what randomness alone might explain. The concept of hybridization is not limited to Mesopotamia. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers, heavenly beings who mingled with humans, producing offspring that destabilized the earth. In Greek mythology, demigods like Hercules embody the same theme, part mortal, part divine, struggling between strength and servitude. The pattern repeats across cultures, beings born of two worlds, carrying both the limitations of flesh and the glimmer of eternity. The paradox is profound. If humanity was engineered to be slaves, why do we yearn for freedom? If our purpose was obedience, why do we dream of the stars? The very capacity to question the system suggests that something deeper was placed within us. Perhaps Enki's rebellion was not simply compassion, but foresight. By embedding divine essence into humanity, he ensured that no matter how strict the controls, the spark of awakening could never be fully extinguished. The consequences of this duality are written into history. On one side, humanity repeats cycles of bondage, empires rising and falling, rulers demanding obedience, systems designed to suppress. On the other side, prophets, mystics, and visionaries arise, reminding us of our higher nature. Slave race and divine spark coexist within the same being. It is this tension that defines the human story, a struggle between compliance and liberation, ignorance and remembrance. The Anunnaki may have intended us to serve, but in their act of creation, they ignited something greater than service. They awakened the potential for transcendence, and that may be the greatest irony of all. The hybrid they fashioned to dig and toil became a species capable of art, of love, of spirit, of questioning the gods themselves. In that moment, the experiment escaped their control. The slave became the seeker. The servant carried within him the seed of the divine. And it is that seed, still glowing in the human soul, that calls us even now to awaken. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, the story of a great tower lingers, a structure that sought to bridge heaven and earth, and a punishment that scattered humanity across the world. The tale survives most famously in the Book of Genesis, where men built the Tower of Babel to reach the skies, only to have their language confounded by God. But like so many biblical accounts, its roots lie deeper in Sumer and Babylon, among the Ziggurats that rose like mountains from the plains. These structures were not imagined symbols. They were real temples, built in stages, rising tier upon tier until they seemed to touch the clouds. Their very name in Akkadian, Babelu, meant gateway of the gods. The biblical version portrays the tower as an act of arrogance, a rebellion against divine will. But when read alongside Mesopotamian sources, another layer emerges. The Ziggurats were not simply monuments. They were believed to be places where heaven and earth met, where the Anunnaki descended to rule, and where humanity sought direct connection with them. To build such towers was not hubris, but alignment with an older order, the attempt to restore unity between gods and men. Yet the story turns dark when that unity is shattered, not by natural disaster, but by deliberate intervention. Genesis 11 records that humanity once spoke one language. With one tongue, they moved as one, worked as one, and built as one. It was this unity that alarmed the rulers of heaven. Now nothing will be restrained from them, the text says, which they have imagined to do. And so the decision was made to break their language, scatter their speech, and divide their strength. The punishment was not death, as in the flood, but fragmentation, a subtler control. By shattering language, humanity was prevented from ever again wielding collective power on that scale. From an esoteric perspective, this is not simply a story of tongues, but of consciousness itself. Language is more than words. It is the architecture of thought. To divide language is to divide perception, to fracture reality into separate worlds. Scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer noted that Sumerian myths often emphasize the gift of language as divine. To revoke it, or to fracture it, was to take away humanity's greatest unifying force. Modern linguistics reminds us how deeply language shapes our minds. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that the structure of language influences how we perceive reality. If our tongues were once united, then our perception may have been whole. One consciousness, one worldview. To splinter language is to splinter thought itself, ensuring that no unified awakening could threaten the rule of those above. It is a control mechanism more lasting than chains, more subtle than war. Across cultures, echoes of this story remain. Myths of scattered peoples, of once shared speech broken apart, appear in traditions from Africa to the Americas. Ziggurats, like Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, are remembered as the possible model of Babel. To the ancients, these were not mere towers, but technologies of alignment, structures designed to anchor heaven to earth. To shatter that connection was to keep humanity earthbound, forever searching, never united enough to reclaim what was lost. The Tower of Babel story, then, is not simply about pride. It is about division as control. By ensuring humanity could no longer speak with one voice, the architects of the system guaranteed that we would remain scattered, competing, and confused. And in that fragmentation, the memory of our true origin slipped further away. Yet hidden in the story is also a clue. If division was imposed, then unity remains possible. To awaken is to remember that beneath the thousands of tongues, the soul still speaks one language, the silent, wordless resonance of truth. In the Gnostic text discovered at Nag Hammadi, we find descriptions of beings called archons, cosmic rulers who govern the material realm. They are not creators in the true sense, but jailers, impostors, who maintain control through deception. The Gnostics claimed these archons feed on ignorance and fear, binding souls to the cycle of birth and death, recycling consciousness into endless servitude. When compared with the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, the parallels are difficult to ignore. Were these sky beings gods, genetic engineers, or something darker, wardens of a prison disguised as creation? The Sumerian tablets depict the Anunnaki not as radiant benefactors, but as beings who came with need and demand. They required resources, gold above all. They required labor, which led to the creation of humanity as a worker species. They imposed kingship, decrees, and floods when control slipped from their grasp. These patterns mirror the Gnostic teaching that the rulers of this world enforce order not for liberation, but for domination. The archons in texts like the hypostasis of the archons are described as arrogant, ignorant of the true source, yet powerful enough to entrap humanity in their schemes. The Anunnaki, too, were portrayed as wielding immense authority, yet their motives were practical, even selfish. Enlil, in particular, bears the traits of an archon. His disdain for humanity, his enforcement of obedience, his decision to unleash plague and flood when humans rebelled, all reflect the archetype of the ruler who values control over compassion. Enki, by contrast, resembles the Gnostic notion of a liberator or Christ figure, defying the system to offer knowledge and survival. This duality, warden and liberator, appears in both traditions, suggesting that the myths may be describing the same dynamic through different lenses. Modern interpreters like John Lamb Lash have argued that the archons may not be physical beings at all, but parasitic intelligences, forces that influence thought and perception. In this sense, the Anunnaki could be seen less as extraterrestrial rulers and more as a symbol of the powers that shape human destiny from behind the veil. Whether literal or symbolic, the role remains the same: to keep humanity from realizing its true nature, to prevent the spark of divinity within from awakening. The idea of humanity as prisoners is reinforced by the repeated theme of limitation. Language fractured at Babel. Lifespan shortened after the flood. Knowledge restricted to priesthoods and kings. Each intervention serves to keep humanity small, divided, and dependent. This is exactly how the Gnostics described the archon system of control: a counterfeit reality designed to distract and bind souls. The earth becomes less a school and more a cage, a place where beings are recycled through suffering while the rulers feed on their energy. Yet the very existence of these stories points to cracks in the prison. If the Anunnaki were true wardens, why do we still carry memories of their manipulations? Why do tablets survive to whisper their deeds, or scriptures hint at rebellion? Perhaps because even within the system, the spark cannot be extinguished. Enki's gifts of knowledge, the serpent's wisdom in Eden, the whispers of prophets and mystics, all are reminders that the trap is not absolute. The question that lingers is not only whether the Anunnaki were real, but whether humanity remains under their system even now. Our modern structures of power, the endless cycles of war, fear, and distraction, echoes of an ancient control program. If so, then to awaken is to see through it. The Gnostics urged their followers to cultivate direct knowledge of the divine, bypassing the rulers. The Sumerians remembered a god who defied his own kind to protect humanity. In both stories, the message is clear. The prison is maintained by belief, but the key lies within. The wardens cannot hold forever what was always infinite. Across cultures and continents, one image coils its way through myth and memory: the serpent. In Sumer, it was entwined with Enki, the god of wisdom and water, symbol of knowledge and transformation. In Egypt, it appeared as the uraeus, the rearing cobra worn on the crowns of pharaohs, signifying divine authority and protection. In India, serpents became the nagas, guardians of treasures and keepers of wisdom hidden in the underworld. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a bringer of civilization, teaching agriculture, astronomy, and law. How can one creature appear so persistently in so many places, always tied to power, knowledge, and the threshold between worlds? The serpent's symbolism is layered. Its ability to shed its skin made it a natural emblem of rebirth and immortality. Its form, coiling and uncoiling, mirrors the spiral of energy rising in the human body, what yogic traditions call kundalini, the serpent power lying dormant at the base of the spine, waiting to awaken. Its hypnotic gaze, its silent strike, its dual nature as both healer and killer, gave it a liminal quality. In ancient medicine, serpent imagery survives even today in the caduceus and the rod of Asclepius, symbols of healing entwined with snakes. To call the serpent evil, as later traditions often did, was to flatten a far deeper archetype. The Sumerians depicted Enki with two entwined serpents, an image scholars link directly to later Mesopotamian and Greek healing symbols. If Enki was the liberator who defied Enlil to give humanity knowledge, then the serpent was not deception, but initiation. This stands in stark contrast to later biblical tradition, where the serpent in Eden was vilified as tempter. Yet even in that rewriting, the serpent remains the one who offers knowledge, awareness, the very awakening that sets humanity on its path. Other traditions reinforce this duality. In Hinduism, Ananta, the cosmic serpent, stretches across infinity, upon whom Vishnu rests as he dreams creation into being. In Norse mythology, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, encircles the earth, a force of chaos destined to rise at Ragnarok. For the Maya, Kukulkan was the feathered serpent, descending from the heavens as light at the equinox. Whether as god, demon, or guardian, the serpent is always at the threshold, linking heaven and earth, life and death, ignorance and wisdom. Some modern researchers, like David Icke, have taken this symbolism further, suggesting that the serpent represents a literal reptilian lineage, beings that rule from the shadows, manipulating humanity through fear. While controversial, this interpretation ties into the same archetypal thread, the serpent as both ruler and deceiver, guardian and oppressor. Whether metaphorical or literal, the imagery points to a recognition that something reptilian, cold, and calculating has long been part of humanity's encounter with the divine. The persistence of serpent symbolism suggests a memory too universal to dismiss. Were the gods of old reptilian in form, leaving an imprint that became myth? Or does the serpent represent something more subtle? A force within, coiled and waiting, both our prison and our liberation? Perhaps it is both. To the ancients, the serpent was never only one thing. It was life and death, wisdom and deception, captivity and awakening. To see the serpent is to face the paradox of power itself. Legends of Atlantis and Lemuria echo like fragments of memory scattered across the world. Plato's dialogues describe Atlantis as a powerful civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, flourishing with advanced knowledge before sinking beneath the sea in a single night of fire and flood. Lemuria, though less defined, emerges in theosophical writings and ancient traditions of the Pacific and Indian Oceans, a land of light, wisdom, and beings more ethereal than human. Though mainstream history dismisses these tales as myth, esoteric traditions and comparative mythology suggest otherwise. They may be cultural echoes of something older, an age when sky gods walked openly and civilizations aligned with their presence. Plato insisted that the story of Atlantis came from Egyptian priests, who told Solon of a mighty people whose hubris led to their downfall. They possessed technologies and sciences beyond their time, and their fall was framed as both punishment and tragedy. Lemuria, meanwhile, entered Western imagination through the writings of Helena Blavatsky and later occultists, who claimed it as the homeland of a root race, a people connected to the stars and attuned to spiritual forces. While no geological evidence of continents by these names has been confirmed, myths from Polynesia, India, and the Americas speak of lost lands swallowed by the sea, leaving only scattered survivors who carried fragments of knowledge into new cultures. In the context of the Anunnaki, these stories gain sharper meaning. Could Atlantis and Lemuria have been colonies of the Sky People, outposts of advanced knowledge established before the flood that erased so much of early memory? The technologies ascribed to Atlantis, crystal energy, flight, manipulation of the elements, mirror descriptions of Anunnaki power. Lemuria's beings of light and wisdom recall tales of the hybrid offspring of gods and humans, bridging two realms. Both civilizations are remembered as places where humanity lived closer to the divine before catastrophe severed that link. Archaeological mysteries align with this possibility. The precision of megalithic sites like Baalbek, Machu Picchu, and Nan Madol defy explanation within conventional timelines. Flood myths found on nearly every continent recall sudden destruction and rising seas. Genetic studies trace humanity back to bottlenecks, where our population nearly vanished, aligning eerily with these tales of cataclysm. To the ancients, these were not abstract. They were memories of worlds erased, encoded into stories so they would not vanish completely. Theosophy taught that the Atlanteans and Lemurians were not merely physical civilizations, but stages in humanity's spiritual development, epochs when the divine spark was closer to the surface, when contact with the higher beings shaped both our biology and our destiny. The fall of these civilizations is then more than natural disaster. It is the collapse of humanity's connection to its star-born teachers, a reset intended to bury forbidden knowledge. Just as the Sumerians recorded a flood that ended the reign of long-lived kings, these myths speak of waters that swallowed empires of light. Perhaps Atlantis and Lemuria are not places to be found on maps, but resonances of an age when the Anunnaki's presence was more direct, when civilizations rose under their guidance and fell under their judgment. The echoes remain, reminding us that humanity may have lived many lives before history officially began. Lost continents become symbols of memory itself, civilizations erased, wisdom scattered, truths hidden beneath the waves of time. The myths of the ancient world often read like science fiction. They describe gods who flew through the skies, weapons that leveled cities in bursts of fire, and temples that hummed with unseen energy. To modern readers, these images are brushed off as metaphor. But what if they are fragments of memory, accounts of technologies so advanced that ancient scribes could only describe them in the language of myth? The Anunnaki, according to the Sumerian tablets, were not ethereal deities, but beings who walked, commanded, and wielded tools that shaped reality. If they were real, their presence would have required vehicles, instruments, and devices far beyond the reach of early human invention. The Sumerians described the Anunnaki arriving in fiery chariots or descending from heaven in flying craft. Temples and ziggurats were portrayed as landing places of the gods, stairways between heaven and earth. In India, similar descriptions appear in the Vedas, where vimanas, flying palaces and chariots, carried gods across the sky, sometimes engaging in battles that sound eerily like aerial warfare. The Mahabharata describes weapons of light that blinded armies and burned entire cities, their aftermath resembling the effects of radiation. To those who recorded these tales, the gods were not imagining thunderbolts. They were describing advanced machinery and weaponry beyond comprehension. At Baalbek in Lebanon, we find megalithic stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons, fitted with impossible precision. Local tradition called it the landing place of the gods. In Mesopotamia, Ziggurats were aligned with stars and planets, suggesting they were not only temples, but perhaps functional structures, beacons, energy transmitters, or even launch platforms. Ancient texts describe them as bond heavens and earth, a phrase that suggests more than ritual. It suggests technology of connection. Power sources may also have been hidden in plain sight. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid has long been interpreted as a tomb, yet no body was ever found within it. Scholars like Christopher Dunn have argued that its internal chambers and shafts resemble the design of a resonant energy device, harnessing vibrations of the earth to generate power. Similar arguments are made about the Baghdad Battery, a small clay jar with copper and iron components that, when filled with acid, produces electricity. Dismissed as a curiosity, it nonetheless suggests that knowledge of power was not wholly absent in antiquity. Weapons of the gods are described with terrifying clarity. The Enuma Elish recounts Marduk wielding a net that captured his enemy, and a weapon that shot forth beams of fire. The Mahabharata describes the Brahmastra, a weapon whose blast scorched the earth, leaving survivors to wash themselves and their belongings in fear of invisible contamination. Archaeological sites in India show evidence of ancient cities with vitrified stone, rock melted by extreme heat, similar to what occurs under nuclear detonation. Mainstream archaeology hesitates to connect these dots, but the parallels remain. If the Anunnaki were real, their reign would not only have been political, but technological. Their ability to fly, to harness power, and to wield devastating weapons would have cemented their rule as divine. To the eyes of early humans, these technologies were indistinguishable from magic, yet they left traces in myth and stone. The question is not whether ancient humans could have built such things alone, but whether they inherited fragments of a system they only partially understood. The legacy of ancient tech may be less about machines we can reconstruct, and more about the recognition that humanity once stood closer to beings whose tools could alter the world. These stories survive not as fantasy, but as warnings. For every tale of wisdom given, there is a tale of destruction unleashed. The gods could build wonders, but they could also erase civilizations in fire and flood. To remember their technology is to remember the double-edged sword of power, creation and annihilation in the same hand. Across the ancient world, humanity built mountains of stone. In Mesopotamia, they were called Ziggurats, tiered towers of mud brick rising above the plains. In Egypt, the Great Pyramids pierced the desert sky with geometric precision. In Mesoamerica, step temples of the Maya and Aztec echoed the same form. To mainstream historians, these were monuments of religion or power, symbols of kings and gods. Yet the myths themselves insist on something more. These structures were not merely shrines. They were places where heaven met earth, thrones for the gods, or perhaps even gateways to the stars. The Ziggurats of Sumer were dedicated to the Anunnaki. Each city had its own tower, a place where the divine ruler descended to commune with priests and kings. The most famous was the Etemenanki of Babylon, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Ancient texts describe these towers as bond heaven-earth, a phrase that suggests connection rather than mere worship. They were aligned with celestial markers, constructed to mirror the heavens. Scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer have noted the precision of Sumerian astronomy, implying that their ziggurats were as much observatories as temples. Some researchers go further, suggesting they were designed as platforms, landing sites, or energetic beacons for the sky gods they served. The Egyptian pyramids deepen the mystery. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built with more than 2 million stone blocks, aligns with true north within a fraction of a degree. Its shafts point directly to Orion's belt and Sirius, stars associated with Osiris and Isis. To the Egyptians, these were not mere stars, but gateways to the afterlife, destinations of the soul after death. Scholars like Robert Bauval, in his Orion correlation theory, argue that the layout of the pyramids mirrors Orion's belt, as it appeared around 10,500 BCE, suggesting an intentional link to the stars far older than conventional dating allows. Were these pyramids tombs, or were they machines, stargates designed to transport consciousness, or perhaps even beings, between Earth and the heavens? Legends support the latter. Arab historians once called the pyramids granaries of knowledge, built before the flood to preserve wisdom from an earlier age. In Sumerian and Akkadian texts, the gods descend to their high places to administer rule. In the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, humanity's attempt to build such a structure is punished with division, as though the rulers of heaven feared what such towers could accomplish. Again and again, the message is clear. These structures were not merely ceremonial. They were functional, designed to bridge realms. Mesoamerican pyramids reinforce the theme. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza produces a serpent of shadow during the equinox, descending the stairs in alignment with the sun. At Teotihuacan, the pyramids of the sun and moon are aligned with astronomical cycles, their massive scale defying explanation with simple tools. To their builders, these were not metaphors. They were engines of time, energy, and connection. Modern archaeology hesitates to speak of stargates, but the precision, scale, and global repetition of these structures defies coincidence. Whether as thrones of divine kingship or portals of energy, they suggest that humanity's earliest civilizations were not primitive. They were guided, perhaps by those who descended from the heavens, demanding monuments that served as both throne and gateway. If the ziggurats and pyramids were truly stargates, then they remind us of a forgotten era when earth and sky were not separate realms, but one continuum. And if they were thrones, they declare that our first rulers were not men at all, but beings whose reign was written in stone, aligned forever with the stars they came from. Since the dawn of time, humanity has gazed at the moon in wonder. It governs the tides, guides calendars, and lights the night with borrowed radiance. But in esoteric traditions and alternative history, the moon is more than a natural satellite. It is a mystery, a riddle in the sky. Some have even suggested it is a construct, a machine, placed in orbit to shape human destiny. Whether symbolic or literal, the idea persists. The moon is not just a companion of Earth, but a mechanism of influence, perhaps even of control. Ancient traditions hint at its strangeness. In some African Zulu myths, the moon was brought here long ago by two brothers, tricksters who placed it in the sky to watch over humanity. Aristotle himself noted that certain cultures claimed to remember a time before the moon, when the skies were darker. Modern science confirms that the moon is unusually large in proportion to its planet, with an orbit that produces perfect solar eclipses, a coincidence almost too precise to be chance. Its density is anomalously low, leading scientists to speculate that its crust is unnaturally light. During Apollo missions, seismometers recorded moonquakes, and when struck, the moon rang like a bell for hours, as if hollow inside. These observations fuel the idea that the moon is not entirely natural. In Gnostic teachings, the moon is tied to cycles of reincarnation, a gate through which souls pass between lives. To them, the moon was not merely a rock, but a mechanism, an archonic construct reflecting light, but not producing it, feeding on human energy as it cycles endlessly. In this view, the moon is both clock and cage, regulating time and memory so that humanity remains trapped in the wheel of rebirth. The Sumerians, too, tied the moon to power. Nana, the moon god, was central to their pantheon. His symbol governed calendars, festivals, and the rhythms of agriculture. But beneath the surface, his role was also about authority, structuring time, dividing days into cycles, embedding humanity in schedules that bound them to labor and ritual. Control through light, control through rhythm, control through the hidden hand of the sky. Modern researchers have expanded these themes. Authors like David Icke suggest the moon acts as a transmitter, broadcasting frequencies that distort human perception, overlaying illusion upon reality. In this theory, the moon is part of a larger control grid, paired with Saturn, whose rings emit vast electromagnetic fields. Together, Saturn and the moon become a system of frequency fences, keeping humanity locked in a narrow band of consciousness. While controversial, the idea resonates with the repeated mythic link between the moon and cycles of control. Even if one strips away the speculation, the moon's influence on human behavior is undeniable. Studies confirm correlations between lunar phases and sleep patterns, mood swings, even fertility cycles. Police departments and hospitals note spikes of activity during full moons. Whether psychological or physiological, the moon seems to tug at us in ways we barely understand. Its pull is not only gravitational, but psychic. If the moon is indeed a construct, then its role in human history may be greater than we dare imagine. It may be the hidden mechanism that regulates life on Earth, controlling tides, time, and even the reincarnation of souls. And if so, then to awaken is to see through its spell, to recognize that the light above us may not be a gift of nature, but a tool of design. The moon shines with borrowed radiance, and perhaps in that borrowed light lies the deepest mystery of control humanity has ever known. Saturn has always been a planet of mystery. To the naked eye, it shines like a distant star, but through a telescope its rings reveal themselves, vast, shimmering bands encircling the gas giant, unlike anything else in the solar system. For the ancients, Saturn was more than a planet. It was a god, Kronos to the Greeks, the devourer of his children, the lord of time. In Mesopotamia, he was Ninurta, associated with judgment and boundaries. In esoteric traditions, Saturn became the archetype of limitation, control, and the inexorable march of cycles. The question arises, why did so many cultures see in Saturn not just beauty, but prison? Some modern researchers argue that Saturn's rings themselves are not merely natural structures of ice and dust, but vast resonant systems that emit frequencies powerful enough to influence Earth. NASA's Cassini mission confirmed that Saturn's rings produce a kind of eerie chorus, electromagnetic waves translated into sound that ripple through space like music. To the human ear, they are unsettling, almost artificial, suggesting a mechanism more than an accident. David Icke and others have argued that these frequencies, paired with the moon, form a grid, a broadcast system that limits human consciousness to a narrow spectrum, what mystics have long called the illusion of Maya. Ancient symbolism seems to support this association. In astrology, Saturn is the planet of boundaries, the one that rules restrictions, laws, and lessons. It defines the edges of the visible planets, the final gatekeeper before the outer realms. Its glyph is a sickle, the tool of harvest, but also of reaping, echoing the myth of Kronos devouring his children to preserve his power. Saturn's influence was always tied to fear, control, and the structures that bind life. The connection between Saturn and time is profound. Our word Saturday carries his name, the Sabbath of rest and limitation. The Roman calendar marked Saturnalia as a festival of reversal, when order briefly collapsed before being reimposed. In esoteric circles, Saturn is the demiurge, the false creator who governs the material world with iron rules, keeping souls cycling in birth and death, never remembering their true origin. In this sense, Saturn becomes not just a planet but a symbol of the prison itself. The rings as frequency fences, the cycles as cages of time. There are strange astronomical coincidences too. Saturn's hexagonal storm at its north pole is a geometric anomaly, a six-sided vortex that defies explanation. To mystics, the hexagon is the cube unfolded, a symbol of confinement. The black cube of Saturn appears in esoteric architecture worldwide, squares and cubes in synagogues, mosques, and city centers. Echoes of a power that shaped human ritual long after its cosmic origins were forgotten. Why does the cube persist as a sacred symbol? Because Saturn represents the box of limitation, the structure within which we live and die. Yet Saturn is also teacher. Mystics have long said that limitation is not punishment, but the forge of awakening. The cage reveals itself as cage only when one becomes conscious within it. The rings may be fences, but they also define the arena where consciousness must rise to recognize its captivity. In Gnostic terms, the archons use Saturn's energy to bind humanity. In mystical terms, Saturn challenges us to transcend. If Saturn is truly part of a control system, then its power lies in rhythm and resonance. It enforces the cycles of time, aging, and decay. But even in its dominion, a truth shines through. The rings may limit perception, yet the spark within is beyond their reach. The Saturn connection is the reminder that the prison is real, but so is the possibility of breaking through. The fence of time surrounds us, but the soul was never born in time at all. There is a mystery encoded not only in myths, but in our very flesh. Humanity has always looked to the sky with longing, as if something within us remembers the stars. From the Sumerians charting Nibiru to the Dogon of Africa, describing Sirius with uncanny precision, from the pyramids aligned to Orion to the Native American tales of star ancestors, this obsession is universal. Why should scattered cultures, separated by oceans, all insist that their origins lie not on Earth, but in the heavens? Perhaps because the memory is not merely cultural, it is biological. It is written in the code of our DNA, a genetic echo of a history that predates what we call history. The Sumerian tablets describe humanity as the product of a genetic experiment, fashioned by the Anunnaki from clay and divine blood. Modern science has uncovered something striking. The human genome contains anomalies, sudden leaps, and unexplained insertions. Chromosome 2, for instance, appears to be the fusion of two ancestral chromosomes, a genetic event unique to humans among primates. Some researchers suggest it happened naturally, but to others, it resembles intervention, a rewriting of the code. Nobel laureate Francis Crick, who co-discovered the structure of DNA, once speculated in life itself that life may have been seeded on Earth through directed panspermia. If even mainstream scientists entertain the idea of intentional seeding, what does that say about the stories etched in Mesopotamian clay? But genetic memory is more than anomalies in the code. It is the way trauma, knowledge, and instinct are passed down. Epigenetics has shown that experiences can alter how genes express themselves, changes that can persist for generations. Survivors of famine, war, and migration carry biological imprints that shape the lives of their descendants. If human beings were crafted by star visitors, then their essence, their memory, would ripple through our genetic inheritance. The longing for the sky may not be metaphor. It may be the echo of our creators within us. Cultures across the world preserve this pull. The Inca called themselves children of the sun. The Egyptians believed their pharaohs returned to the stars after death. The Lakota Sioux told of star nations guiding their ancestors. The Japanese spoke of Amaterasu, the sun goddess, as progenitor of their emperors. These myths are not isolated inventions. They are global patterns, pointing to a shared sense of belonging to something beyond Earth. Even in dreams and altered states, people report visions of the stars, journeys beyond the planet, encounters with luminous beings who remind them of forgotten origins. Modern UFO abduction narratives echo the same themes. Genetic experiments, hybridization, reminders that humanity is part of a larger cosmic drama. Whether literal or symbolic, the message is the same. Our story does not begin here. Perhaps this is why the stars call us, why we build telescopes, launch rockets, and dream of distant worlds. Something within us remembers. A seed planted long ago still whispers of home. Our DNA is not just a record of survival, but a map of origin, pointing not only backward in time, but outward into the cosmos. The pull we feel is not fantasy. It is memory, genetic memory of a time when we were closer to the stars, and of the beings who walked among us to shape what we would become. When the earliest stories of humanity were carved into Sumerian clay, they spoke openly of sky beings who engineered life, ruled over men, and shaped civilizations. These accounts were detailed, unapologetic, and startlingly clear. Yet by the time these stories filtered into later traditions, through Babylon, Canaan, and into the Hebrew scriptures, the narrative had been transformed. The gods became God. The serpent who offered knowledge became the deceiver. The flood was framed as divine judgment, not the wiping away of inconvenient hybrids. Bit by bit, the story was rewritten, reshaped to hide the memory of the Anunnaki and the truths of humanity's engineered origins. Religion, in this sense, became less about revelation and more about suppression. The process can be traced. The Atrahasis epic describes the creation of humanity as the toil of clay and divine blood, a deliberate act of genetic engineering. In Genesis, this becomes the molding of Adam from dust by the hand of God. The original story of intervention is collapsed into a singular act of divine will, removing the complexity of multiple beings and their conflicting motives. The Sumerian tale of Enki saving humanity from Enlil's flood becomes Noah favored by a singular lord. The ambiguity is erased. One god replaces many. The story shifts from cosmic politics to moral lesson. And with that shift, humanity's memory is narrowed, its vision of origin domesticated. Why would this be done? Power. To frame human beings as created in the image of a single, omnipotent deity is to place them in submission to that deity's earthly representatives, priests, kings, and institutions. If humans remembered they were hybrid beings, born of intervention, carrying the spark of something beyond, they might not bow so easily. If they recalled that gods could disagree, fail, or even be resisted, they might question authority itself. By rewriting the story, religion ensured obedience, not awakening. The Gnostic texts banned by the early church echo this suppressed truth. In the Apocryphon of John, the creator of the world is not the true God, but a false one, Yaldabaoth, an arrogant ruler who claims divinity but is only an impostor. The Gnostics saw the Old Testament God as an archon, a warden who trapped humanity in ignorance. This view was violently suppressed, its texts burned, its teachers killed, because it threatened the emerging orthodoxy. To admit that the biblical God might not be ultimate was to unravel the control system built upon him. Even within mainstream religion, fragments of the older truth leak through. The book of Genesis acknowledges the sons of God, who took human wives, producing giants. The book of Enoch, once revered but later cast out of the canon, describes fallen watchers who taught forbidden arts to mankind. These echoes align perfectly with the Mesopotamian tales of Anunnaki intervention. Yet they were declared heresy, apocrypha, unfit for the faithful. The story was not lost by accident. It was erased deliberately. The suppression extended beyond texts. Temples were destroyed, idols broken, rival traditions demonized. Priests declared one truth, and one only, that humanity must obey. In doing so, the lineage of memory that stretched back to Sumer was cut. What survived were fragments, myths of gods who fell from the sky, whispers of lost civilizations, symbols half understood. But the core message, that humanity had been engineered, manipulated, and yet carried within it a divine spark of freedom, was buried beneath layers of doctrine. Religion preserved a moral order, but at the cost of truth. It offered certainty, but denied memory. And in doing so, it fulfilled the very role of the archons described in Gnostic teaching, keeping humanity bound in ignorance, mistaking the prison for creation. The forbidden story was not destroyed. It was hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to dig through clay tablets and apocryphal texts to rediscover it. To see past suppression is to remember, and to remember is to awaken. Beneath the heart of Vatican City lies a labyrinth of chambers and vaults, known collectively as the Vatican's secret archives. Spanning miles of shelves and filled with documents dating back centuries, this archive has long been shrouded in mystery. Officially, it is a library of church history, papal decrees, letters, treaties, and records of councils. But speculation has always swirled around what lies beyond the catalogued shelves. Could the Vatican also be the final resting place of knowledge, too dangerous to reveal? Some researchers argue that hidden in these vaults are artifacts and texts that stretch back to the dawn of civilization, records that connect directly to the story of the Anunnaki and humanity's true origins. The Church has admitted that the archives contain hundreds of thousands of volumes, with only a fraction accessible to scholars. Requests for access are tightly controlled, and certain sections remain forbidden. Why such secrecy? Official explanations cite preservation and order, but critics point out that texts banned during the Inquisition, apocryphal Gospels, and ancient manuscripts seized during conquest all disappeared into Vatican hands. Among them, it is said, may be Mesopotamian tablets, Egyptian scrolls, and even artifacts from the Holy Land that tell a story very different from the one preached at pulpits. Throughout history, the Church positioned itself as the guardian of truth, but also as the filter of it. When the Spanish conquered the Americas, They burned countless indigenous codices, yet some were sent to Rome. When Mesopotamian sites were excavated in the 19th and 20th centuries, tablets and fragments mysteriously vanished, with rumors that certain finds were quietly shipped to the Vatican. Even whispers of correspondence between Sumerian discoveries and papal officials persist in the corners of esoteric history. The implication is clear. Knowledge that threatens the narrative of divine creation and singular God has been hidden away, buried under the authority of the world's most enduring religious power. The Vatican has always had reason to guard such truths. If the tablets of Sumer were widely understood to describe gods who were not gods at all, but beings of flesh and technology, it would challenge the foundation of Judeo-Christian doctrine. If artifacts revealed that the garden, the flood, and the tower were all retellings of Mesopotamian events, it would undermine the claim of divine uniqueness. If suppressed gospels described Christ as one who revealed the false creator rather than serving him, as some Gnostics taught, the entire edifice of orthodoxy would tremble. It is telling that texts like the Book of Enoch, which describes the watchers descending from the heavens, were preserved in Ethiopia but excluded from Rome's canon. It is telling that references to giants, hybrid beings, and rebellious gods are scattered across scripture but rarely preached. It is telling that the Vatican has built its identity on continuity, yet its deepest vaults remain closed. Silence can be as powerful as proclamation. Those who speculate on what lies within suggest that the archives may hold direct evidence of the Anunnaki story, clay tablets too explosive to release, fragments of knowledge that prove humanity was engineered and ruled by sky beings long before the Church claimed spiritual authority. Whether literal or symbolic, the Vatican's secrecy plays the same role as the archons described by the Gnostics: to obscure, to filter, to keep humanity bound to one story while burying another. The archives may never open fully, but the persistence of rumor itself testifies to something deeper. Humanity senses that the full truth has been withheld, that behind stone walls and papal seals lies not just church history, but our own. Perhaps one day the vaults will be unsealed. Until then, the Vatican's silence remains its loudest confession, that there are secrets about our origin too dangerous to speak aloud. In the book of Genesis, a short but haunting passage lingers. The sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the mighty men of old, men of renown. Later traditions would expand this into full narratives, and in the book of Enoch we find the most detailed account. A group of angels called the Watchers descended to earth, defying divine order. They taught humanity the arts of metalwork, enchantments, astronomy, and cosmetics. They lay with human women and produced offspring, the nephilim, giants whose presence disrupted the earth. At first glance, this sounds like a myth of rebellion, but when compared to Sumerian and Akkadian sources, the parallels to the Anunnaki become unavoidable. The Sumerian tablets describe beings descending from the heavens, not as messengers, but as rulers. They intervened in human development, granting knowledge of writing, agriculture, and law. They also mingled with humanity, producing hybrids that challenged the balance of creation. The flood myths of Mesopotamia, where the gods sought to wipe away both humans and hybrids, find their mirror in Enoch, where God sends judgment to destroy the Nephilim and bind the rebellious Watchers. In both traditions, the pattern is the same. Beings from the sky grant forbidden knowledge. Humanity grows beyond its station, and catastrophe follows. The Watchers' gifts, though condemned, were transformative. The Book of Enoch says Azazel taught men to forge swords and women to adorn themselves with paint and jewelry. Others reveal the courses of stars and the signs of the earth. To later editors, these were corruptions. But read through another lens, they are identical to the civilizing gifts attributed to the Anunnaki: technology, astronomy, agriculture, culture itself. Why would such advancements be framed as sin? Because they empowered humanity, breaking dependence on the rulers above. Just as Enki defied Enlil to give humans knowledge, so the Watchers defied divine command to elevate mankind. The children of these unions, the nephilim, are described as giants with insatiable appetites, consuming resources and turning violent. This recalls not only the hybrid offspring of Anunnaki and humans, but the global myths of giants, from the Titans of Greece to the Jotnar of Norse myth. The presence of colossal ruins, megalithic stones, and legends of massive beings add weight to this possibility. The Watchers, like the Anunnaki, blurred the line between creator and corrupter, gift-giver and tyrant. Early Christian authorities banned the Book of Enoch, striking it from the canon. Its descriptions of rebellious angels, hybrid offspring, and catastrophic floods were too disruptive. Yet fragments survived in Ethiopia, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in oral traditions, ensuring the story was never entirely lost. The suppression mirrors the erasure of Mesopotamian truths, another deliberate narrowing of humanity's memory. If the Watchers were the Anunnaki under another name, then both traditions describe the same intervention, framed either as rebellion or as providence depending on the needs of authority. The parallels raise a profound question. Were the Watchers angels cast down for their disobedience, or were they sky beings who broke ranks, just as Enki broke with Enlil? Were the Nephilim abominations to be destroyed, or evidence of a hybrid experiment that slipped out of control? In either reading, the message is clear. Humanity has always been caught between rulers who seek obedience and liberators who grant dangerous gifts. The Watchers and the Fallen, the Anunnaki and the rebels, may all be facets of the same forgotten history, a story of intervention, knowledge, and judgment written in the stars and buried in scripture. Across the myths of the world runs a thread of prophecy, an expectation that the beings who once ruled will return. The Sumerians wrote of cycles tied to the movements of the heavens, suggesting that the Anunnaki were not gone forever, but bound to the orbit of their distant world. In Babylonian tradition, Nibiru was called the planet of the crossing, returning after thousands of years to bring upheaval. In later myths, this hope and fear transformed into visions of gods descending at the end of ages, bringing judgment, renewal, or both. The question that lingers is whether these stories are allegory or a memory of a literal promise that the Sky Lords would one day walk among humanity again. In the Sumerian king list, kingship was said to descend from heaven after the flood, implying a recurring intervention. The gods may have withdrawn, but their bloodlines and their influence remained. Ancient prophecies spoke of returns in cycles when the stars aligned and portals reopened. Even in Mesoamerica, the figure of Quetzalcoatl was remembered as a god who left with a vow to return, a prophecy that later made the arrival of Europeans seem like destiny. These global motifs suggest a pattern. Civilizations remembering powerful teachers or rulers who vanished but promised not to abandon humanity forever. Religions carry the same theme. Christianity awaits the second coming of Christ, descending with power from the clouds. Islam speaks of the Mahdi and the return of Isa. Hinduism anticipates Kalki, the final avatar who appears at the end of the Kali Yuga. Buddhism speaks of Maitreya, the future Buddha who will arrive when the Dharma has faded. All point to a final visitation, a cosmic intervention at the close of a cycle. While mainstream theology frames these as spiritual events, they resonate closely with older accounts of gods returning in flesh and fire. Modern UFO lore mirrors this expectation. From the mid-20th century onward, waves of sightings, encounters, and abduction narratives have reignited the sense that humanity is being watched, tested, even prepared. Contactees often describe beings who speak of cycles, of great shifts approaching, of humanity on the brink of transformation. Some describe warnings of ecological collapse, nuclear danger, or spiritual decay, echoing the judgments ascribed to returning gods in the past. Whether these encounters are physical, psychological, or both, the pattern is unmistakable. The Sky Lords never left the human imagination, because perhaps they never truly left humanity itself. The prophecies of return also carry a note of warning. If the Anunnaki or their descendants were indeed our creators, would their return mean liberation or renewed control? Would they come as saviors, bringing advanced knowledge to heal the world, or as masters reclaiming their creation? The duality is embedded in the myths themselves. Enki the liberator versus Enlil the stern judge. Watchers who gifted wisdom versus archons who enforced obedience. The return could mean awakening, or the tightening of the cage. And yet, perhaps the true meaning of these prophecies is not external at all. The return of the gods may symbolize the return of memory, the awakening of the divine spark within humanity that has lain dormant since its creation. The Sky Lords come again, not from above, but from within, when we remember who and what we are beyond the stories written for us. Whether literal or symbolic, the prophecy of return calls us to prepare, for either the heavens will open or our consciousness will, and in that unveiling we will see the truth. The gods never left. They have always been here, waiting for us to awaken enough to recognize them. Across the scattered civilizations of the ancient world, stories of gods descending from the heavens repeat with uncanny similarity. In Egypt, they came as the Necheru, radiant beings who taught agriculture, architecture, and the mysteries of the soul. In Mesopotamia, they were the Anunnaki, rulers from the skies who shaped kingship and mankind itself. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec remembered Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a teacher who brought astronomy and the calendar. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, a pale, bearded figure who rose from Lake Titicaca to teach law and craft before departing with a promise to return. These traditions are separated by oceans, yet they carry the same motif: gods arriving as if from another world, imparting knowledge that propelled civilizations forward. What makes these accounts so striking is their consistency in describing these beings as more than spirits. They are embodied, they descend, they interact. The Sumerians called them those who from heaven to earth came. The Egyptians described their gods as dwelling in ships of the sky, with depictions resembling boats sailing across the stars. The Dogon people of Mali told of the Nomo, amphibious beings from Sirius who descended in fiery crafts. The Hopi of North America remembered the Kachinas, star beings who visited their ancestors and instructed them in sacred ways. Such myths defy the idea of coincidence. They suggest a shared memory of contact, interpreted through cultural lenses, yet rooted in the same phenomenon. Modern interpretations often frame these as evidence of ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors who guided human development. Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods popularized this view, pointing to artwork that seems to depict flying machines, beings in helmets, and structures resembling launch pads. At Palenque in Mexico, the sarcophagus lid of King Pakal shows a figure seemingly operating controls, surrounded by flame and smoke, leading many to call it the Mayan astronaut. While mainstream archaeology insists these are symbolic images, the technological interpretation persists because it aligns so neatly with the myths themselves. Gods who arrive from the sky, gods who bring knowledge, gods who one day depart. Even sacred architecture reinforces the pattern. The pyramids of Egypt, the Ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the temples of Mesoamerica all rise in stepped or pointed forms, as if designed to mirror the heavens. Alignments with Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades appear again and again, suggesting these sites were not only religious, but astronomical, markers for the return of sky beings. Why such obsessive orientation to the stars, unless those stars were home to the very beings remembered as gods? To the ancients, there was no separation between religion and contact. The gods were not abstractions. They walked, spoke, and ruled. They gave calendars that tracked celestial cycles with impossible precision. They taught agriculture that allowed deserts to bloom. They offered systems of law and architecture that still stand today. Even when they departed, they left promises of return, encoded in prophecy and ritual. If these beings were indeed astronaut gods, their presence raises a profound question. Were they benevolent teachers or custodians ensuring control? The myths hold both views. Quetzalcoatl is remembered as a bringer of light, while Tezcatlipoca, his rival, brings war and darkness. Enki saves humanity, while Enlil seeks to destroy it. In Egypt, Osiris brings order, while Set brings chaos. The duality repeats, reminding us that the gods were not uniform but divided, their conflicts playing out on the stage of human history. Whether we see them as extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, or archetypes of a hidden memory, the astronaut gods can't be dismissed. Their footprints are global, their influence undeniable, and their legacy remains alive every time we look to the skies, feeling that strange pull, the memory of teachers from the stars who once shaped our beginnings and may yet return to witness our awakening. From the earliest days of civilization, power was justified not through merit, but through blood. Kings declared themselves descendants of gods. Priests claimed exclusive access to divine will, and ruling families guarded their lineages with obsessive care. The Sumerian king list openly proclaimed that kingship descended from heaven, with reigns that stretched for thousands of years before the flood. In Egypt, pharaohs were sons of Ra, embodiments of Horus, their blood distinct from the common people. In Mesoamerica, rulers traced their ancestry to the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. What unites all these traditions is the same idea. Those who rule are not fully human. They are hybrids, carrying within their veins a trace of the beings who once walked among men. The notion of hybrid bloodlines is not confined to antiquity. The Bible itself describes unions between the sons of God and human women, producing the nephilim, giants, and men of renown. Jewish mystics preserve stories of such hybrids long after they were erased from canon. The Book of Enoch describes their corruption, but also their power. When these beings were destroyed in the flood, traditions suggest their bloodline survived through select families. In this way, divine ancestry remained the foundation of kingship long after the gods themselves withdrew from direct rule. Throughout history, elite families have guarded their heritage with secrecy and control. Royal dynasties across Europe intermarried for centuries to preserve what they believed was blue blood, a symbol of distinction tied to divine right. the Merovingians of France claimed descent from a union between a sea creature and a queen, echoing myths of hybrid origins. In England, coronation rituals still involve anointing with oil and oaths that tie monarchs to biblical kingship, as though affirming a line that stretches back to heaven itself. Even the Catholic Church, with its celibate priesthood, maintains apostolic succession, the belief that divine authority is passed down directly, one generation to the next, unbroken and untouchable. Modern conspiracy theories have expanded these motifs. Researchers like David Icke argue that many world leaders, from politicians to bankers to monarchs, belong to bloodlines that trace back to the ancient hybrids. He suggests that behind the facade of democracy and modernity lies the same principle that ruled in Sumer. Those in power today are descendants of the Sky Lords, maintaining control through hidden networks and ritual. While controversial, this theory resonates because it echoes what the ancient texts themselves claimed, that power was always derived from divine blood, and that this lineage has never truly disappeared. Genetics adds another strange layer. Studies of royal lineages show remarkable continuity across centuries, suggesting deliberate preservation of heritage. Certain haplogroups appear again and again among elites, while folklore persists around families said to be chosen or different. Whether literal or symbolic, the idea of blood as power still drives the structures of authority. When politicians emphasize heritage, when monarchs trace genealogies back to legendary figures, they are invoking a narrative as old as kingship itself. To rule is to carry the mark of the gods. If humanity was engineered as a hybrid species, then perhaps the elites are not unique at all, but reminders of our shared nature. Yet the persistence of secret bloodlines suggests something more deliberate, a system maintained to keep power in the hands of those who claim divine ancestry. From pharaohs to popes, emperors to presidents, the story repeats. Authority is not earned, it is inherited, and the inheritance is more than wealth, it is blood. The question is whether these bloodlines still carry something other than myth. Do they preserve fragments of the genetic spark of the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Sky Lords of old? Or is the belief itself the true mechanism of control? A story used to keep humanity in awe of those who sit on thrones. Either way, the effect is the same. The world is still ruled by those who claim descent from the heavens, echoing the first kings of Sumer. The hybrid experiment did not end with clay and blood. It continues in palaces, parliaments, and pulpits today. In the modern age, the myths of the sky gods have not faded. They have simply changed form. Where the ancients spoke of Anunnaki descending in fiery chariots, today we speak of unidentified flying objects, craft that defy physics, appear and vanish at will, and leave witnesses shaken by the strangeness of their encounters. The phenomenon has persisted for decades, woven into reports by governments, pilots, and ordinary people. And within the thousands of testimonies, a theme emerges that mirrors the oldest Sumerian accounts, a genetic agenda, a continuation of the experiment that began when humanity was first fashioned from clay and divine blood. The post-World War II wave of UFO sightings launched a new era of speculation. Roswell in 1947, radar contacts, pilots describing discs and lights that outran jets, all gave rise to the idea that someone was watching. Yet as sightings multiplied, so too did close encounters. Witnesses did not just see craft, they reported contact with beings, often humanoid, often described as greys, tall whites, or reptilian in form. And in countless abduction narratives, people described being taken aboard craft, subjected to examinations, and presented with hybrid children. The echo of the Atrahasis epic is unmistakable. Where Sumerian tablets speak of humans being engineered by gods to serve, modern experiencers describe genetic manipulation carried out in secret, as though the ancient experiment never ended. John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist, studied abductees and concluded their accounts carried psychological truth, even if the phenomenon defied conventional explanation. He found repeated patterns: extraction of sperm or ova, visions of hybrid infants, messages about humanity's destiny tied to its DNA. Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs catalogued similar testimonies, arguing that the central purpose of abductions was hybridization. To skeptics, these are hallucinations or cultural myths. Yet the sheer consistency across thousands of cases, spanning continents and decades, suggests something deeper. Perhaps a genetic program continuing in shadow, echoing the interventions recorded by the Sumerians. Even governments have taken notice. Declassified documents reveal that both the US and Soviet Union studied UFOs not merely as aerial anomalies, but as potential contacts with intelligences. In recent years, the Pentagon has confirmed unidentified aerial phenomena, objects displaying flight beyond known technology. And while officials remain cautious, whispers of biological recovery, even non-human materials, persist. If such craft exist, then their occupants must have agendas. And if their focus is on human genetics, as testimonies suggest, then the story of intervention has never truly ceased. The parallels with ancient myths are striking. The Watchers in the Book of Enoch descend, mingle with humanity, and alter its trajectory. The Anunnaki craft humans to labor, but embed in them divine essence. The Nephilim emerge as hybrids, too powerful to control. Today, abductees describe beings who say humanity is at risk, ecologically, spiritually, and genetically. Hybrids, they are told, may be the bridge to survival. It is as though the same drama of creation, rebellion, and hybridization is replaying, but in modern skies instead of ancient temples. The genetic agenda raises profound questions. Are these beings preserving their own lineage through us? Are they altering humanity to withstand coming planetary changes? Or are they continuing a system of control, refining the worker race as they did thousands of years ago? The line between benevolence and manipulation remains blurred. Just as Enki appeared as savior and Enlil as oppressor, modern encounters suggest factions, some offering warning and guidance, others coldly extracting genetic material with no regard for consent. The modern UFO phenomenon may not be new at all. It may be the continuation of the oldest story humanity ever recorded. The sky gods never left. They changed their masks, their methods, and their myth, but their purpose may remain the same, shaping humanity at the level of its very code. What began in Sumer with clay and blood continues in laboratories aboard silent craft. The experiment endures, and the question remains whether its end is our liberation or our further enslavement. The mystery of human origins is no longer confined to clay tablets and myth. It now lives in the double helix of DNA, a code so intricate that even today, scientists admit they do not fully understand it. When the Human Genome Project was completed in 2003, it revealed startling facts. Less than 2% of our DNA codes for proteins, the building blocks of life. The remaining 98% was labeled junk DNA, a term that implies uselessness, though many researchers now believe it functions as a complex regulatory system. Some have suggested it may even carry hidden information, a kind of biological library beyond our current comprehension. What if within this so-called junk lies a signature, a marker left behind by those who engineered us? The Sumerian texts describe humanity as a genetic hybrid, crafted from the essence of gods mixed with the substance of earth. Modern science has uncovered anomalies that make this idea less fantastical than it first appears. One of the clearest examples is chromosome 2. Humans possess 23 pairs of chromosomes, while our closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, have 24th chromosome 2, appears to be the result of a fusion event. Two ancestral chromosomes joined into one. Mainstream science calls this a mutation, but the precision of the fusion, complete with remnants of telomeres and centromeres where they do not belong, suggests a deliberate act. If life is code, then here is a patch, an edit that rewrote what it meant to be human. Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA structure, speculated that life on Earth may have been seeded intentionally, a theory he called directed panspermia. Though controversial, it reflects an intuition that DNA carries fingerprints of intelligence. In 2013, researchers published findings that certain non-coding regions of human DNA contain sequences that appear highly ordered, as if designed. To some, this hints at a signature. To others, it is dismissed as coincidence. But when compared with the ancient claim that gods crafted mankind, it raises a question science has yet to fully confront. Is our DNA natural, or is it a message? Other puzzles deepen the mystery. Humans have unusually large brains for our body size, language abilities far beyond survival needs, and a capacity for symbolic thought that appeared abruptly in the archaeological record. Anthropologists note a great leap forward around 50,000 years ago, when art, ritual, and complex tools suddenly flourished. Geneticists point to signs of bottlenecks and selective sweeps, moments when our species was altered rapidly. Were these leaps natural, or the result of external intervention? Even mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child suggests a single common female ancestor, mitochondrial Eve, who lived roughly 150,000 years ago. While mainstream science interprets this as genetic drift, esoteric readings suggest it could reflect the moment of hybrid creation, when a modified lineage was introduced and spread across humanity. The question of signatures in our DNA is not just scientific, but symbolic. Nearly every spiritual tradition insists that humans carry within them a spark of the divine, something eternal encoded into the mortal frame. Whether described as soul, spirit, or consciousness, this spark resonates with the idea that our creators left more than flesh behind. They left a key, hidden in the very structure of our being, waiting for us to recognize it. If the Anunnaki engineered humanity, then our DNA is both cage and clue. It binds us to cycles of flesh, but it also carries the memory of stars. Perhaps the so-called junk DNA is not junk at all, but a dormant library, a code within the code, that once awakened reveals the truth of our origin. Science digs at its edges. Myth has whispered it for millennia. And somewhere between the two, the oldest signature in the world waits to be read. The deeper one studies the myths of origins. The more a troubling question emerges. What if the experiment never ended? The Sumerians told us that humanity was engineered by the Anunnaki to labor, but within us a spark was placed that allowed awareness. The Gnostics later warned of archons, parasitic rulers who built a counterfeit reality to keep souls trapped. Modern researchers speak of control systems, frequency grids, and illusions projected into human perception. Each tradition points to the same chilling possibility, that humanity is not free, but still living inside a program designed to obscure its true nature. The Great Deception is not a story of the past. It may be the story of now. Religion was the first layer. By rewriting the Sumerian accounts into monotheistic scripture, the memory of multiple Sky Lords was compressed into one God who demanded obedience. The Serpent who gave knowledge became evil, the Liberator recast as deceiver. Humanity was taught that to question authority was sin, and to seek knowledge was rebellion. This inversion placed generations into a narrative of guilt and submission. But behind the doctrine, the older story persisted. Rulers feared awakening, and so they clothed control in the language of holiness. The second layer is time itself. Saturn, the devourer, became the keeper of cycles. The moon became the regulator of reincarnation, feeding illusions of continuity. If consciousness recycles endlessly under a grid of control, then forgetting becomes the prison. Souls enter bodies with amnesia, live lives under systems designed to distract, and die only to be pulled back into the same loop. The simulation is not digital, but metaphysical, a field woven through frequency, perception, and belief. To the ancients, this was the net of the archons. To us, it is the matrix. Technology may now be the third layer. The myths spoke of gods descending in ships, wielding weapons of light, and demanding monuments aligned to the stars. Today, humanity builds satellites that circle the Earth, digital networks that shape perception, and artificial intelligences that predict behavior. The line between ancient rulers and modern systems blurs. If the Anunnaki once imposed kingship to govern, today corporations and algorithms do the same. The control system evolves, but its essence remains. Keep humanity within boundaries, limit perception, feed energy upward into the system. Even abduction narratives echo the same agenda. People report being harvested for genetic material, told they are part of a hybrid program, reminded that they are not entirely free. The story of manipulation that began with clay and blood appears to continue in laboratories aboard craft. If true, then the program has simply shifted form across ages. Priesthoods replaced by governments, Ziggurats replaced by screens, clay tablets replaced by digital code. The deception adapts, but its purpose is constant, to keep humanity from realizing that it is more than the roles assigned to it. The greatest deception, however, may not be external at all. It is the voice inside that insists the prison is normal, that there is nothing beyond the program, that we are only flesh and chance. This voice, whether born of conditioning or broadcast through unseen fields, is the true warden. It convinces humanity to police itself, to dismiss its own memory, to laugh at the very idea of gods, hybrids, and control grids. And in that laughter, the truth is buried again. But the persistence of these myths suggests the deception is not perfect. Cracks appear in synchronicities, in dreams, in visions that remind us of forgotten worlds. Prophets and mystics across ages have seen through the veil, describing the same prison with different names. They remind us that if the program is real, it is not unbreakable. For what was engineered can be reversed, and what was concealed can be remembered. The great deception may rule the surface, but beneath it, the spark waits, untouched, eternal, and destined to awaken. If the story of humanity begins in the hands of the Anunnaki, then our destiny must end beyond their grasp. Liberation has always been the hidden thread, running beneath the myths. The Sumerian tablets record how Enki defied the council of gods to give humanity the spark of awareness. The serpent in Eden offered knowledge even when it was forbidden. The Gnostics spoke of the Christ not as one who bound humanity to a god, but as one who revealed the counterfeit rulers and urged souls to remember their true origin. In every version, there is a fracture in the design, a place where freedom leaks through the bars. The question is whether humanity can find that crack and widen it enough to escape. Breaking the design begins with recognition. If we are unaware of the cage, then every chain feels like the natural order. Religion teaches obedience as holiness. Governments teach control as security. Technology teaches distraction as progress. Yet each of these systems may be echoes of the original program, to keep humanity focused outward, dependent on rulers, and forgetful of its inner spark. Liberation means turning the gaze inward, seeing that we were shaped to serve but born to awaken. Once the illusion is recognized, it loses much of its power. Ancient wisdom traditions preserved fragments of the keys. The yogis of India taught techniques to awaken Kundalini, the serpent energy coiled at the base of the spine, said to reconnect humanity with cosmic consciousness. The Egyptians encoded in their mysteries the journey of the soul through the stars, preparing initiates to bypass the gates of false rulers. The Gnostics offered gnosis, direct knowing of the divine spark within, bypassing the archons who sought to recycle the soul. Each path emphasized the same truth. Knowledge is freedom. Memory is liberation. The rulers control by obscuring both. Even science hints at this potential. Neuroplasticity shows that the brain is not fixed. It can rewire itself, transcend patterns, and create new realities. Quantum physics reveals that consciousness is not passive but entangled with the very fabric of existence. Epigenetics proves that genes are not destiny. They can be switched on or off by environment and will. These discoveries, though framed in material terms, echo the oldest teachings, that the code can be rewritten, and the prison is not absolute. Liberation is not rebellion in the sense of war. To fight the program directly is to feed it. The archons thrive on fear and anger, just as the Anunnaki fed on obedience and labor. True liberation is withdrawal of consent, a quiet remembrance that refuses to be bound. It is the recognition that the body may have been engineered, but the soul was never created by the Anunnaki. It is eternal, infinite, older than the stars. And no program can contain it once it remembers itself. The design is vast, but it is not flawless. The very myths preserved across cultures are evidence of cracks, reminders smuggled across time that humanity was not born to be a slave race, but to carry the divine spark forward. Liberation begins with those who remember, who awaken, who refuse the great deception. The final step is simple, though not easy. To live as though the cage was never real, to embody the freedom that was buried in us from the start. For when enough of humanity remembers, the design itself will collapse, and the legacy of the Anunnaki will dissolve like dust in the wind. At the end of this long journey through tablets, myths, and hidden histories, a deeper truth begins to surface. The story of the Anunnaki may explain much. The sudden rise of civilization, the anomalies in human genetics, the obsession with kingship and divine bloodlines. It may account for the flood myths, the giants, the watchers, and the strange continuity of control systems across the ages. Yet, if we stop there, we remain trapped in their story, still defining ourselves by the designs of beings who claimed mastery over us. The true revelation is something greater. You were never only engineered. You were never only a hybrid of clay and blood. You were always divine, carrying within you the spark that no god, no archon, no program could extinguish. The Gnostics hinted at this when they spoke of the false creator, Yaldabaoth, who fashioned the material world in arrogance. They said his power was great, but incomplete. For into his creation a higher source breathed light, a fragment of the true eternal. That light is what you carry, what every human carries, unmanufactured, untouched. Even if flesh was shaped, even if chromosomes were spliced, the consciousness animating the body was never theirs to own. It comes from beyond stars and beyond time. The archons could entrap, the Anunnaki could manipulate, but they could never create soul. That essence was, is, and will always be divine. This is why myths of rebellion repeat, why Enki defied the council, why Prometheus stole fire, why the serpent offered knowledge in Eden. These figures symbolize not deception, but memory, the reminder that humanity carries within it the key to its own freedom. The rulers may bind language, shorten lifespans, impose laws, or broadcast illusions, but they cannot erase the spark. They can only distract from it. Liberation comes the moment you remember what was hidden, the moment you realize you are not the clay, but the fire within it. Science itself is beginning to echo this truth. Studies of consciousness suggest awareness is not confined to the brain, that it may be a fundamental aspect of the universe itself. Quantum entanglement shows that separation is illusion, that all things are connected beyond space and time. These findings whisper the same message mystics have carried for millennia. You are not bound by your flesh, nor by the story of your genetic origin. You are awareness itself, temporarily clothed in matter. The closing revelation is simple, yet shattering. The gods were never your masters. They were teachers, jailers, manipulators, sometimes benefactors, sometimes tyrants, but they were never the source of who you are. That source lies beyond them, beyond Nibiru, beyond Saturn's rings or the moon's pull. It lies in the eternal field from which all arises. You were never merely engineered. You were never merely a slave race. You were always the divine spark, asleep for a time, dreaming of cages, waiting to awaken. To awaken is to remember. To remember is to dissolve the program. And when the program dissolves, what remains is not fear, not servitude, but freedom. The story of the Anunnaki is a chapter in humanity's book, but not its ending. The ending is the realization that you were never the code. You were always the light behind it, eternal, infinite, indestructible, divine. If you've journeyed with us this far, you know the story is bigger than clay, bigger than kings, bigger than gods. It is the story of you. And this is only the beginning. So now, I invite you to continue walking with us. Watch the other videos waiting here. Each one another doorway, another memory, another piece of the truth. If this awakens something inside you, let us know. Leave a comment, share your voice, add your spark to this community of seekers. And if you feel the weight of this message, share it. Send it to someone who is ready to remember. Most of all, stay with us, subscribe, because every week we step deeper into the hidden currents, the ancient truths, the mysteries they never wanted you to see. The journey does not end here. It begins here, and it begins now, with you. Welcome to the Hidden Voyage. Welcome home. SoulWhisper and SoulCreator. The Hidden Voyage.